Is it is it Hey, it's Ben Ufana, and today I'm with a friend from way back, Kevin O'Connell. We had lost touch for some time, but despite some of the misgivings I have about social media and how distracting, time wasting it is, it does serve some useful purpose because it's helped me to reconnect with friends, and actually it Facebook can serve as a great address book and uh, both, yeah, Facebook, LinkedIn, all that. Just had to minimize time on it otherwise. But anyway, um, so Kevin, maybe introduce yourself and share a little bit about your background and the work you've been doing for the past few decades.
Well, I'll try to be as brief as possible. I have 30 years experience in the mental health field as a licensed clinical mental health counselor. I have 15 years as a consultant for Child and Protection Services in New Hampshire, and I've
Hmm.
been working at an integrated care facility for the last 6 years as a mental health counselor and consultant.
Hmm.
And yeah, so I've had a lot of experience with families and distress and troubles with different issues. One of them being alcohol-related, substance-related issues
Hmm.
that they're trying to seek help for, and also in terms of how it impacts their families.
Hmm. Yeah. And that it can be incredibly difficult. I know I grew up in a home with alcoholic stepfather between the ages of 7 and 14. He died suddenly as a result of construction mishap when a saw shorted out on him and he was basically electrocuted. But during those 7 years, it was pretty intense. He drank heavily. Sometimes he was physically violent. I think one memory I don't imagine I could ever forget is he came around the side of the house in a rage and he had a butcher knife in his hands. It's probably, I don't know, say 8 to 10 inches long, and I thought that was it. But he walked up, grabbed me, spun me around, kicked the shit out of me, and stormed off. But and even my grandfather was had drank heavily, and uh, he didn't physically abuse my mom, but she witnessed him um, beating up her mother, and so she grew up witnessing that violence. You know, throughout her childhood and adolescence.
Wow.
Yeah. So, also, just at the age of 17, I'd taken off on my own, and I was living in a community of predominantly Kiowa, Apache, Comanche Indians, uh, other surrounding tribes as well. Um, Now, I will say that among Native Americans, I think there's a much larger percentage of people who just abstain from alcohol. But the issues with heavy alcohol consumption, and I think that's common among many indigenous populations who, like those of us of uh, European descent, the fact that we've had alcohol as part of our cultures for, who knows, thousands, tens of thousands of years, whatever, and so because of that, we've adapted genetically, but those cultures that have not been exposed to alcohol that long, um, are much more prone to developing an addiction. And can you say, could you elaborate on that some? What do you have to say?
Well, yeah, the hereditary and genetic factors that are involved with alcohol dependency and developing alcohol use disorders, yeah, that definitely is a factor, undeniably. There's so
Hmm.
many, it's multi-determined, biopsychosocial, spiritual impacts that can produce that kind of effect. But
Mhm.
the known common things is just tolerance. That's not a red badge of courage, by the way, because you could more likely develop it if you have high tolerance. So
Mhm.
it's being able to tolerate is not the same thing as having a diagnosis of a dependency. So that's a misnomer too. Being able to handle your alcohol, that's not really an indicator of whether you don't have the issue.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a complex and it's individualized for each person that involves with it, but there's cultural factors too. You're absolutely right
Mhm.
that involve large populations or segments or cultures or tribes, that kind of thing. So, but I take an individualized approach regardless of whatever it is that's going on culturally or background wise,
Mhm. Wow.
because it's a relationship. I'm trying to understand the person's relationship with that substance is for them, and then I can broaden it out with the context of where it comes from.
Mhm. Mhm. Can you elaborate more on, some of these different components, like the biological, psychosocial, all that? Yeah, what your observations are with the different individuals you're working with and how the dependency begins to develop over time.
Well, you just basic knowledge is that it takes about, excuse me, about 15 years for a man to develop alcohol dependence on average in a bell curve, and a woman 7 years to develop alcohol dependence or a substance use disorder on average, because women have less water in their bodies. So the biological aspects, the gender aspects, do have an effect on how you develop it and how fast you develop it on average.
Mhm.
Um, but you can beat the curve and actually develop it faster in terms of the quantity and frequency of high risk choices or consumption of that neurotoxin. And
Mhm.
it does, create changes in your brain structure and functioning. And then, dependent upon other factors, which is trauma, abuse,
Mhm.
you just to be a little bit more fine line on it is like, yes, is it develop into problems that are end up creating problems for other people and that person, yes. But people overlook sometimes that the use of that substance is basically a solution for lack of other coping devices. So
Mm.
they're actually self-medicating a lot of trauma and emotional abuse through the use, and that becomes a problem in of itself. That's a good important thing to notice, because if you don't look at it as the person's way of coping, then
Mm.
you're trying to take away something without replacing with something else. And that's why it's more difficult to let that go.
Very important point there. I know in my own experience working with people, especially individuals with histories of trauma, is that as the traumatic wounds are healing, I see many of these individuals begin to clean up. And so, I find that people stop smoking, um, stop, uh, either stop or reduce their consumption of alcohol and other recreational drugs. And and they're able to, as that trauma is healing, there's less of a need um, to utilize some substance to numb or medicate those discomforts that they don't want to feel or experience.
Yeah, that's so important, Ben, because it you can analyze the problem to death, like beating a dead horse here, but
Hmm.
and you understand everything about the problem, but what is its solution that's healthy solution? And if you provide somebody with safety, security, acceptance, and listening and being seen, the relational components of that presence actually begins to diminish the need to basically use a substance to be safe and soothe oneself. So
Yeah.
there is a phantom limb approach to it, though. Although people are getting what they need, they are in an automatic pilot mode because of their brain structure and functioning is oriented towards looking towards that substance almost as food.
Hmm.
So even though they don't want to do it, they find that there's a craving or urge to do something that they know they don't want to do. So you have to reverse that through a deeper process of healing in terms of nutrition, health, exercise, and
Hmm.
ongoing, contact and attachment with healthy other people. And then that becomes the new groove. and
Mhm.
then the chain or the link of that attachment, the attachment to the coping mechanisms that's unhealthy becomes like a big chain, and it becomes less and less and less to where it's like a necklace. You can snap it
Mhm.
over time.
Hmm. Yeah, I've found that in my own experience trying um, to talk with an individual, I mean, to some extent, during the sessions, there is some dialogue, discussion, but if I were just to interact verbally with someone, I feel like my ability to affect change should be just incredibly limited. But it's in the course of actually doing the sessions where it would be at a deep level, they're processing or healing, transforming the emotional wounding, the trauma itself. And there's this process that's occurring by which it's doing some kind of reset of the entire body and mind. I know even with my own experience, I think all of us, every one of us, to some degree, struggle with addictions of one form or another. It could be addictions to alcohol or other recreational drugs, um, addictions to social media, uh, or just other online content, and foods, many things. Addictions to certain individuals, to a romantic partner. Um, and so our body and mind falls. We fall into these unhealthy habits of one form or another. And I know with internet use, for instance, I mean, there and social media in particular is specifically designed. It's highly engineered to trigger the brain's dopamine reward cycle. And so doing that, it's, like even going back to Pavlov experiences or Pavlov's experiments where he would ring the bell and when he was going to present or offer or feed the dogs and the dogs would salivate and so he paired that response of the bell with the dogs being fed and so he discovered that after a while he could just ring the bell and without even providing food and the dogs would salivate so those responses become hardwired and so all of us in one way or another we have these triggers that are established. And so, again, that could be alcohol, it could be food, it could be addiction to a certain person, whether sex addiction, there's all kinds of things. Um, but in the course of working with people, it's going in and it's uh, dismantling a lot of those triggers and just building this new foundation. And then even for myself, just some of the areas where I've struggled in my own life, some of my own challenges, I would go through the Vision Quest, which is the Native American healing practice. We go out 4 days and nights to fast without food and water. And in going through this process, it's eh, like I can just feel like a lot of these deeply entrenched patterns and traumas just being healed and transformed. And so it's again doing this reset and and it's something that in this culture that I feel most people are lacking these kinds of resources and and so consequently many people continue to struggle with addictions indefinitely um, in various areas of their life, whether it's to substances like alcohol or food or um, porn or social media or whatever it is. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, can you share some more, like your own experiences working with different people and different individuals and like some of the observations? I know, like from our discussions, you know, I've always been impressed. I've always been impressed with a lot of the insights. I've always learned a lot, from our discussions when we would talk about, people struggling with addictions, and you're pointing out that, the problem's not the person so much; it's the addiction itself. I want to make sure I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's my main emphasis, is to assist people to understand the problem is the problem. The person is not the problem. The
Hmm.
person is never the problem. And
Hmm.
to help them to separate themselves from the problem, which is so essential from my perspective, because that goes to the heart of the value of a person, which is everybody matters.
Hmm.
But if you're looking at yourself from an internal perspective that you're the problem,
Hmm.
then how can you ever get away from that?
Hmm.
So it's like someone becoming to awareness of like that subtle difference, so that they can begin to have a different, more empowered stance towards their life and towards their approach towards health and wellness, which is not that they're deficient or defective, but they're at core always already okay.
Hmm.
At the core premise, I'm always already okay. That's not a statement of denial about how I've been affected by things that have become problematic in my life.
Hmm.
And when that happens, the connection of a relationality that's based upon authentic acceptance and appreciation and approval and attention begins to create those corrective emotional experiences for the person. So what's healing is the relationship and the corrective emotional experience that go to the heart and soul of a person emotionally. And then that connects to what you're doing, which is connects to deep structures of the brain and amygdala integrating with the prefrontal cortex. And that integration, creates a wholeness once again.
Hmm. Wow. Can you specifically like describe some of the well, like you've worked with different individuals and you've seen them go through the transformation where from um, heavy substance use, whether it's alcohol or other recreational drugs, to cleaning up their lives. And um, can you describe that your own process, um, the stages of recovery that an individual goes through?
Um, well, I think that from my perspective, it's everything's individualized.
Right. Mhm.
However many people, however many types of addictions there are, is contingent upon however many people there are on the planet.
Mhm.
So i- it's like an inside out job to help understand each person's individual relationship with whatever substance that another people might have in common with them. But
Mhm.
I can't compare anybody to anybody else. So I literally take it as one individual relationship at a time, and
Mhm.
with the relationship with something they're trying to struggle with, and understand them in terms of what how that developed as the origin of that use, as you were saying, the Pavlov's, association,
Yeah.
and then that created an attachment, and that was a reliable, consistent other, which was the substance that was
Mm.
always the ones that basically soothed them.
Mm.
So you're looking for soothing and see, all these things are connected to attachment, right?
Right.
And that goes deep within the brain in terms of experiences they've had at times that they found like, well, this is a relief. I don't think anymore. Oh, I feel like my problems are gone away, and so that's a solution. And then me understanding that, and then I would also, without trying to change, control, fix, save, or rescue a person, I would ask him, so what's the downside for that? And now that they come up with for them, oh yeah, well, I don't like that. I lost my license, I lost my children, I lost my job, I lost my car. Yeah, okay, so a lot of the things that they don't like actually was connected to that particular relationship. So now it's basically what they want to do about it, but it's not. They cannot do anything about it. They can continue to doing what they want to do that way. But then what happens, because it's not healthy, it creates problems from their perspective, not from my perspective
Mm.
at all. And I think that's a dicey thing because it's hard to see people suffering. But
Mhm.
when you're well-intendedly trying to assist somebody, sometimes you actually undermine the process of them coming to understand and take responsibility for themselves in that regard. And you want to support and empower that part. That's why it's so dicey, and that's why, that's another topic we could talk about, which is that's how codependency ends up tying into all this stuff, because people care about people that are suffering and they want to help them, but then they don't understand that they're actually empowering their unhealth with very good intentions.
Enabling the addiction or whatever other dysfunctional behavior.
With really good intentions, because you don't like to see someone suffer, but then what happens, you don't understand that you can't get into the space or place of assisting that person to make the fundamental choices that helps them to improve the quality of their life themselves. And there's a boundary there.
Of course, a big part of it too is that the person who's in the codependent role is feeling so out of control in their own life, because of their partner's addiction, and so they're um, desperately trying to hold things together or to uh, reduce the um,
The tension. Well, see, the thing is that's important to understand is that that feeling of out of control is an empathic response, and
mhm,
you're actually picking up a parallel process of what that actual person actually feels inside themselves, and then you get yourself confused with them.
mhm,
So if you're feeling out of control, you're feeling what that person's feeling that has that relationship with the substance that causes them to feel in control. And
mhm,
that's why it creates that craziness. And so what they say with the 12 steps is like one of the first things is I'm powerless. I think the meaning of the powerlessness is the sense that you actually feel fundamentally at a core level out of control.
mhm,
And you're trying to do something to gain control back.
mm,
And then you use something that's not effective in gaining control back, but only it is, but only temporarily. That's why it's unhealthy, because it doesn't create lasting control. It creates more of a sense of out of controlness. And at a deep level, you still feel out of control, but you're basically, um, so the idea is like you're still having the feeling of feeling out of control, but it's masked by the substances that you're using.
mhm,
So that basic core issue is not resolved at a core level. That's why you need the subs to keep yourself away from the solution, because if you go to the solution, you have to feel that feeling again.
mm,
This is designed to not feel those feelings. Anything
mm.
that causes me to not feel, that's the solution.
On the part of the one who's doing the consumption, because on the other hand, with when you're consuming alcohol and other substances, there's the numbing, but then your partner, on the other hand, with the especially if they're empathic, they're picking up on all those emotions and everything that the person who's using would be numbing themselves to. So,
Right. But then what happens is the focus goes on the person that has the problem, and then the person that's actually empathic, it doesn't take care of themselves, and they become
mhm,
sick themselves
mhm.
until
Wow.
they realize I need help. I
Mhm,
need help because I'm in this toxic environment that's causing me to move myself away from my acceptance of and taking care of myself. So it's like a fundamental pull in both directions. And until you wake up, you won't recognize that you're the one that need help now, because now you are unhealthy yourself.
wow. Sounds like a horrible dynamic to be stuck in.
It is a horrible dynamic, and it's like it's not easily predictable because, as I said, it's coming from a space of really pure intentions. There's nothing wrong with the intentions of trying to help and assist somebody that you love.
Mhm. It's
But how you
naturally.
do it, it's almost like a skilled surgeon. They better know they better really know their stuff. Otherwise, they're going to nick an artery when they go and do their heart surgery. If you don't know your stuff, you're going to create more of a problem by going in there.
Mhm. Wow. What would you suggest as far as, say, if you're working with someone, for instance, and their partner is drinking heavily or using other substances? I mean, that may be too generalized of a question, actually. but what are
Yeah,
some
it is.
yeah, that's why you're actually, your field, your specialization here. So, but
Yeah, that's why there's no platitudes about this stuff, and that's why it always
mhm,
comes back to individual. I mean, yeah, you could
yeah,
talk in generalities, but the thing is, when I'm right in front of a person, they have
mhm,
their own degree of attachment or stuckness that's connected to their own patterns that are probably connected to other people that they've interacted with even before they knew this person that they're in front of is was on the planet.
yeah,
So
mhm,
it's not just that person, their dynamics playing out with that person. So
mhm,
you can't. So the you can see the amount of complexity that connects with each individual live can't be generalized. And
mhm,
also where that person is on the sense of health and wellness and doneness or basically readiness to basically address those things that were prior to this current relationship is also individualized. So you have to respect that person where they're at because they might continue to go in and engage in a relationship that's dysfunctional for a lot of reasons that are not healthy for them. Fear of abandonment, fear of being alone. And
mhm,
so they're operating off of fear, not out of actually the love that would help them and the other person, even though their intentions are right, but they might have experienced this type of relationship was the same relationship that they had with their father
mhm,
or their mother. You know what I mean? So this is all home, you know? So they're engaging again to try to like get the love they never got.
mm,
But they don't understand that this is not the source because they're looking at somebody that doesn't have the capacity to fulfill their need. And that requires acceptance of that, which requires moving through grief, profound grief. Like, wait a minute, that's not fair. That's not right. That shouldn't have. Yes, yes, yes. You're right. That's not justice. That's right. So it's very radical what you have to confront in terms of
mhm.
accepting things that were not your fault.
And you're mentioning a really key point here that what I find is that in working with people, um, a lot of people stay in these really toxic, dysfunctional relationships, and that could be, whether it's with someone who's drinking heavily or addicted to other substances, or a relationship with someone who's a narcissist or uh, abusive or dysfunctional in whatever way. And a big part of it is because uh, people, majority of people do not really do a very good job when it comes to processing their own emotional responses. I'm not saying that um, in a critical way. It's just more that to a large extent we've never been taught how to work constructively with our emotions, and so what tends to happen is there's a lot of numbing, a lot of disconnect. Um, and when we're not able to do that deep level of processing, literally, we need to be able to digest our life experiences and our subsequent cognitive and emotional responses. So if we can't do that, then we go through these experiences in a relationship that oftentimes are very distressing, evoke a lot of difficult or painful emotions. When we're not able to process that, we internalize those emotions, and parts of us on the inside just freeze up. And and as that happens, we're we fixate in that holding pattern, and so the dynamic continues to perpetuate itself indefinitely. Whereas that what I find in working with people individually is they go, to that a deep altered state, and they're processing, they're digesting that life experience. Say, in this case, this long history with their partner, all this backlog of whatever anger, frustration, or grief, or these conflicts, arguments that they've gone through. As they're able to digest that and And there's this building of this new foundation, there's this letting go. Now, sometimes, in some instances, it depends on their partner. I've seen their partners come along and evolve uh, with the individual that I'm working with. I've seen that even working with some people, their children who were acting out would go through this evolution as well as now I'm working with the parent. And just even in my own personal experience where I've held on to really toxic relationships as I've gone through the vision quest, and I would be digesting the current life experiences, but also going way back, um, healing, transforming, digesting the traumas of my past, then my attachment to individuals that were, you know, highly dysfunctional, abusive, or whatever they were, that would dissolve and I would evolve beyond that. And so, it's complicated, much more so if you have children with someone, you're attached to that person for the rest of your life. But um, in that respect, I'm fortunate that I don't have that kind of attachment to someone that um, with children. But I think again, what I'm getting back to is that a lot of people not being able to process on that deep level emotionally, that keeps them locked into that holding pattern, and they stay there indefinitely with a partner that's abusing substances, or any of innumerable other kinds of dysfunctions.
Yeah, so I think you're hitting what one of my core premises of all of this stuff, if you want to reduce it, right, down
Mhm,
to like, okay, so what is required? And to me, it's an emotionally corrective experience
mhm,
on a deep core level. And that comes in the context of an emotionally healthy contact with a therapeutic other.
mhm,
The more you can do that, the more you're replacing the dosage you got of the dysregulation with the dosage of regulation, consistent attachment, a person that basically allows you to become who you are rather than hide from who you are in order to protect yourself from the hurt and pain and trauma you've experienced. So, however way you want to slice it, the path is always in the context of emotionally corrective experiences that usually happen in the context of being with an empathic other as a guide, support, or help. Doesn't matter who it is.
mhm,
It's just that I don't see how it's going to happen outside of a relationship because this is deep, deep, deep emotion that's connected to energy.
mhm,
And as I like to look at emotion, is that E dash motion, energy in motion.
mhm,
So you have to access the energy and move it through the system. Otherwise, it remains stagnant and stuck. And when you're accessing it through your approach and Vision Quest, I do think that is an intelligence beyond our our intellect. There is an
mhm.
intelligence beyond thought
Far
that
beyond.
actually is higher level intelligent that actually knows what to do, just like the acorn knows how to grow to become a tree.
Mhm,
So we're not different from nature. So that intelligence will move through us. We're blocking it because we're protecting ourselves from that movement through for a damn good reason. Because when we were exposed and vulnerable, we were hurt.
mhm,
So you're accessing something that's painful to go into. That makes it hard to kind of access it. We understand it, but it's like an iceberg over time. With the heat and warmth of love, it just melts that frozenness.
mhm. And it takes courage, because um, with so many people, we've learned to, on some level, that it wasn't safe, and so we've numbed ourselves. And again, I think a lot of it goes back to the fact that people haven't ever really been taught how to work constructively with their own emotional responses, and so again, whether it's with alcohol or um, refined sugar or just you know, food, eating to numb ourselves. I mean, there's innumerable ways that we numb or disconnect and are just suppressing. just pushing the emotions down.
Yes.
And so our resistance to going there, um, I had to, I mean, like years ago, I had these patterns playing out in my own intimate relationships, or not so intimate at the time, unrequited love patterns playing out. And one of the biggest mistakes I made was resisting that pain. And so I had to teach myself to, instead of resisting, fully acknowledge the reality of what was transpiring and say, like, you know, the fact that either she wasn't present, she was interested in somebody else, um, or just had no interest in me, or whatever it was, or was abusive. And the more that I could fully acknowledge the reality, and with each person, we're all faced with different challenges. So it's like whatever challenge you're faced with, whatever the reality you're dealing with, like what is your authentic feeling response to what's happening? Acknowledge it. Like, what's happening? Where are those feelings? Or what are the feelings that you're experiencing? Where are they located within your body? And bringing as much awareness as you possibly can to what you're feeling and being fully present with that, breathing from the depth of it and continue to follow it as it goes through its progression. Um, because the more that we can be fully present with our authentic feeling responses and process or digest them, and then making use of the various interventions, whether it's working with a psychotherapist, counselor, someone in your capacity, whether it's doing deep tissue body work, um, doing other therapeutic interventions, working with a gifted healer, doing like I do, going on the vision quest, all these things. Every tool we can utilize to heal and transform um, our authentic emotional responses, to digest, transform our life experiences, that's going to facilitate that healing, that evolution, that growth. And so a lot of the dysfunctional coping mechanisms, are addictions, other um, neurotic behaviors. But Carl Jung, where he said, neuroses is always the substitute for legitimate suffering. And so it's just all the crazy dysfunctional ways we act out. And we all do it to varying degrees. We're just on a continuum somewhere between extremely dysfunctional, non-functioning to higher functioning, but we're still, to some degrees, we all have these dysfunctions.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that suffering gets a bad rap in that regard because suffering is part of like moving through the process. If you try to
Hmm.
like, the problem with addiction is you're trying to get rid of suffering without recognizing the value of the suffering.
Hmm.
And if you do what you're talking about, which is like not try to get away or numb or escape it, it creates a transformational process in your body mind where you move through it to another level of being with that suffering. But
Hmm.
just like what Buddha was saying, he discovered all life is suffering. Okay, that's a real bummer, right? But he was like kind of connecting, like he was just going to look it straight in the eye.
Hmm.
And then he realized that at a deep core level, what did he say? Craving, right? That he was actually talking about addiction in a way.
Hmm.
It's like, and when that drops, you penetrate that veil. There's something else is there to replace that sense of like connection, equanimity to the all that's really present without trying to get away from anything. But prior to that, you're in a suffering state. So we might as well just normalize suffering. The human condition is suffering.
Hmm.
Even if there isn't any trauma or all these other extra crazy stuff that we go through, some more extreme than others, right? If you're on the planet, you're suffering.
Hmm.
Can you compound the suffering by reacting to the suffering to try to get rid of it? Yes. So now you have suffering on top of suffering. And that's what you're talking about when you're talking about addiction. So you take away that, it's all going to be good. You're not going to be suffering. No, you're going to be suffering. Hey, wait a minute. When am I going to stop this stuff? Well, that's coming back down to reality. There's a lot more work to do after you stop, you put down that drug or that bottle, right? And that's where people are miserable because they don't do any more emotional work after they stop the relationship with the problematic habit.
Yeah, and problem so often is that we stop one addiction, like, um, a lot of people go in, and I'm not attacking any modality here, but, often it's how it's used, and if you use the modality, in a way that's, what's the term, ecological, uh, really understanding the, our body and mind and its operational principles, for lack of a better way to say it.
Mhm.
But you have people who go in for hypnosis to stop smoking or to for weight loss, and so uh, they're utilizing hypnosis um, to attempt to control an addiction to a substance, whether it's food or smoking. I haven't heard so much about using hypnosis for alcohol since cessation. Maybe I haven't, but from years back, when I did an internship with a hypnotist years and years ago, it was primarily primary two things were food and smoking cessation,
Mhm.
and and so often um, we eliminate one source of addiction and it gets replaced with another to-
Mm.
totally different addiction. So, for instance, if you stop drinking and um, if you're not really dealing with the underlying emotional wounding, then obviously that's going to be replaced, and you end up, um, possibly eating a lot more or consuming a great deal of sugar. Another
Mm.
thing that I find really interesting too is just my experience working with people who have, um, when, maybe they spent, you know, they drank heavily for years and years. I see something comparable too, that people who have been on antidepressants and other psychotropic medications for
Mhm.
years is that, as we're going through our life experiences, it we have cognitive response and we have thoughts in relation to what's occurring, but we also have this emotional feeling response. And so if where I there are different sides to this. I've worked with people, interacted with many others, with various um, psychiatric issues. I mean, just like people who were just absolutely delusional, and in some instances, medications may be the best known solution,
Mhm.
so that these individuals do not harm themselves or even worse, harm somebody else.
Right.
And uh, so that in that case, there is a need for medications in some instances, but you think for like thousands and thousands of years, we didn't have antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, and a lot of people just functioned or coped. And the fact that at this current time in history, many of us are just on sensory overload, with our use of the internet,
Mhm.
social media. It's a fire hose of just so much input in the 24/7 nonstop news cycle. And people are just on sensory overload. That makes it even more difficult for people to process emotionally,
Yeah.
just to cope with their own the day-to-day realities of the relationships and other aspects of their lives. And so if people are not processing emotionally, and the fact too is, that continually triggering that dopamine reward cycle in the brain,
Yeah.
which fuels our addiction to social media and other online content. And it keeps people at a more superficial level of
Mm.
awareness, which impedes that deep level processing of
Yeah.
their emotions and their life experiences. And so that's very numbing, very disconnecting. And so if people can't process, digest their life experiences and their own emotional responses, and so there's this backlog of all this undigested content. But on top of it, because they're not managing, they're not coping, so they're pouring alcohol on top of it. They're they're throwing other recreational drugs down in there. They're on antidepressants. Maybe they're doing a combination, which a lot of people do, of all these things. And but what I find is that when people self-medicate with alcohol and other recreational drugs, or if they're on the antidepressants, other pharmaceuticals,
Mhm.
there's often there's this okay, like on a certain level, we're still having this cognitive and emotional response, but somehow the circuits are disrupted. And so there will be this residual that builds up in the body of all this um, undigested emotional content, and it
Yeah.
literally it goes through further stages of like degeneration or putrefaction. It just builds up in the body. So a person goes off the medications or they stop drinking, and then once they do, it's like they no longer have that buffer, and there's all this like thick congealed residual, and it can feel so horrible that um, and so it's that much harder sometimes for them to do the work. I've seen people do it anyway, but it takes a lot more courage. And the other thing too is that there's a lot of faculties within the brain, the mind, throughout the body, and all of that that have to do with our ability to process and digest our life experiences and our subsequent emotional responses. And so, um, when we're utilizing substances, um, be it alcohol, other recreational drugs, and even the pharmaceuticals, antidepressants, it's retarding the development of a lot of these core crucial faculties.
Mhm.
Um, Now, I hear the argument in many instances where, sometimes a person could go through a bad breakup and they're even feeling suicidal. I went through that. I felt that. Um, I had a lot of graphic imagery playing out in my mind when that happened. But um, way back there in my 20s, and I was seeing a psychotherapist, and she never suggested antidepressants. I think I scared the shit out of her because she had never seen anybody go so deep into their pain as I did.
Mm.
But she saw me move through it, and it was just this kind of instinctive understanding. I needed to just go into the depth of it, be fully present, and I would just keep breathing into it for hours even.
Yeah.
And but I just taught myself to cycle through it and until I came out the other side. Sometimes it would be so intense, I would just feel my body consume with it, but it would break open at a certain point, and I could feel the pain come out of my body in waves, and
Mm.
this emanation of warmth starting to glow from within. And so it's like, um, there's this way in which we take on these life challenges that we're facing, and it is going to evoke, we'll suffer at times. It will evoke enormous pain. But when we can go into it and digest it, we're building foundation. And the more foundation we build and the stronger that foundation, the less inclined that we're going to be towards needing a substance
Mm.
or some other numbing agent to take us away from what it is that we don't want to feel or cope with or deal with. And so the more we face it and deal with it, the more resources we're going to have to just go forward and deal with what we need to deal with in our
Oh,
day-to-day
absolutely.
lives.
Yeah, well said. Absolutely. This is not a quick fix. This is a life transforming choice.
Hmm.
This is a path. This is
Hmm.
not like, just getting something superficially done and you go on your merry way. No, this is like a commitment towards life transformation and growth on all dimensions.
Hmm.
Short of that, I don't know how you can push through to different planes of, sense of serenity and peace.
Hmm. Yeah, I think an important part here, and this goes back to addictions as well, is the importance of having healthy models. Because, for me, living in some of the Native American communities, living out on the Navajo reservation for some time, and and seeing some of my peers, I finished high school there in Oklahoma, and it was painful, very disheartening for me seeing some of my peers that and the families that some of them were growing up in, and the heavy, heavy alcohol consumption and just not having those models. I can't say that I had the best models either in many respects. Yes and no, but uh, but even if we didn't grow up with that kind of dysfunction, a lot of us don't have the best models. But training with the Native American doctor, medicine man, and training with the master from China. Not to say that they didn't have their own dysfunction too, but in many respects they did model. There are these traditions, and you'd see these individuals go through just years and years and years of intensive training and discipline,
Mm,
and they're continually developing greater and greater power,
mm,
um, greater capability, competency, and and how that translates into every aspect of their life. And so I think that's important for each of us, to be seeking out um, models, people that we can that are high functioning, that are living from a place of integrity, and that we could um, learn from their examples
yes,
and
absolutely.
and be the best that each of us can be.
Yeah, I think that's a profound choice of, what you want to do in your life and who you want to be. And those deeper existential questions just come to the forefront. And sometimes it's difficult to even decide and know what you're doing anything for. And so you have to kind of dig a little bit deeper as to like, who am I doing this for? And what
Mhm.
am I doing? And why am I doing it? And why does this matter to me? And why is this important? So those kinds of processing things help you to come to understand, what you'd want to embark upon in terms of invest your time and energy for. If you're doing it for somebody else, it won't work in the end anyways,
Mhm.
even if it's somebody that you admire. Or
Mhm.
sometimes people try to become like another person. No, never try to become like anybody. You just use that as a template, but never try to compare yourself to another. Just be more and more who you are. That's the greatest challenge, is to accept
Mhm.
and love yourself and express your own unique talents and gifts. And how can you do that? And where can you do that? And what allows you to do that? All those deeper questions, I don't think they really ever stop, because there's layers and layers to basically the forks in the road that you cross in life. And you say, yeah, I did that. I don't want to do that anymore. It's like so there's always decisions along the way, even when you choose a life path.
Mhm. Right. So, as we're doing this broadcast, people are going to be in all kinds of different spaces. Some people have made tremendous progress, progressed along their healing journey. But there's some people, that uh, maybe this is pretty new for them, and they are struggling with addictions to alcohol and other substances. And what would you say to these individuals in terms of getting started, and the importance of doing so? The big why they would want to do this for themselves, and possibly even for their loved ones as well.
I would say to have someone ask the question like to really write down in a journal or paper or just think or with a trusted friend, like ask themselves what do they want?
Hmm.
That's the most important question. What do you want?
Hmm.
And then as you answer the question, you might find there's different layers of superficiality that you're going through to for is that what really you want? Like you further and further get to something else that's even more important than what you initially might say. So
Hmm.
that in itself is a process. Do that. Uh, Number two is a developmental capacity to ask for help.
Hmm.
That's actually a hard thing to do. It's like we are penetrating the ego, which says, and the culture says, I'm supposed to do this on my own, or pull yourself up from your boots. All these myths, mythologies in our culture that you're just supposed to be independent, self-sufficient, and not need any help. That's a lie.
Hmm.
Asking for help is an act of courage,
Mm.
and it's essential. So, what do you want? Ask for help, and then the three words I always say is connection, connection, connection. The more connection you have, the more expression you'll have, the more likely is you'll find your way home.
Mm. And yeah, I'm sure people I know people all over the world are going to see this broadcast. And so, um, where to reach out? Where do you suggest they begin to reach out for help?
I would say that there's more help out there than you realize. If you would search within any community, I think there is some social services. In every catchment area in the United States, there's uh, a community health center, number one. And there's also subcategories of community mental health centers.
Hmm.
And these days, there's also a lot of online resources in terms of Psychology Today or um, for therapy access. I don't know if your type of field has a network that you can access, for Vision Quest or like that. But
Not really.
uh,
Yeah. Unfortunately, I
yeah,
shouldn't.
that'd be great. That'd be great. Um,
Mm.
so, um, yeah, I think, and also as you said, the tool that's useful is the internet. You could almost find anything on the internet, right?
Yeah.
Um, uh, and if you're wanting that, you can see where that leads you. It's kind of like a trail as you go down that road. But it's really kind of like every town, every catchment area, every county has these resources. And then from there, even if you don't go to those sources, they can connect you to other resources. So it's like a networking, like a tree. You branch out, but it's all around you.
Yeah. I think it depends too, because uh, uh, I was talking with a friend back in Sri Lanka a few weeks ago, and he was telling me about how it's these incidents of cutting among adolescents that has caught on in Sri Lanka. He's up in the former war zone in the
Hmm.
north of Sri Lanka. And, when he was telling me that, it was like my heart was aching a bit because I know the kind of like the lack of resources and the understanding that my friend is at a loss as to, and I got the impression that people within the mental health community are just way overtaxed. I at one point spoke to the staff members in the psychiatric ward at the one of the main hospitals in the Kilinochchi district in
Hmm.
the former war zone there, and just the psychiatrist there was, I could see he was burned out in many
Mm.
respects. Just again understaffed and just limited resources. You have it was a brutal civil war, and there were um, thousands of disappeared. I think Sri Lanka has something like the one of the highest numbers of enforced disappearances in the entire world,
Oh my God.
and the government has just um, they've never come clean, and I saw a lot of film footage of a lot of these individuals just surrendering to the government forces at the end of the war, and they were just being carted off. And the war ended in 2009, and to this day, many of my friends, their own loved ones, their family members, their siblings, their children, um, they there's no word what happened um, to the
Wow.
loved ones who were disappeared. When I was in Argentina a few decades ago, and the mothers of the disappeared in Argentina, the military junta down there, I think it was something like about 30,000. And so, um, in the United States, we are fortunate that we have these mental health resources.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've been a bit frustrated with the um, that it could there are certain limits to conventional psychotherapy, for instance,
Yeah.
and so that's I worked with a psychotherapist for a few years, and then and for many of us, that is a critically important part of our healing journey. In addition to working with a psychotherapist, I spent years just absorbing, just devouring all kinds of clinical literature, just
Hmm.
to better understand trauma. I don't have the extensive background in addictions as you do, the clinical understanding, but I did gain a great deal of understanding about emotionally traumatic wounding, all that, and I'm always um, striving to learn more, and that's one of the strongest points of within the field of psychology, is that these pathologies have been very well mapped out or defined, but then we need to incorporate some of these like indigenous healing practices and the practices such as mindful meditation practices as well, in
Yes.
order to have a develop a much more comprehensive model of healing. Um, so,
Right. Absolutely.
yeah. Anything that you want to bring in, or we've covered a lot of ground, and I'm sure that there's uh, a million other things we can talk about here. We can go into some more things later on in future broadcasts. But is there anything else you want to add in for now that's important that you'd like for people to hear or understand?
Um, just no, just to reiterate that if anything, that they're not the problem,
Hmm.
and to begin to get support to find, acceptance, appreciation, from those around them, and to set boundaries with those that basically provide them with a sense of undermining or a negative type of energy or feedback. Just to be aware of that, that you're in charge of setting that boundary in terms of what you're exposed to. And if people
Hmm.
can just do that alone, they begin to tune into whether or not they've been accepting things that basically are not good for them.
Hmm.
I would just leave that as a as a concrete path to begin to embark upon. Because as you said, if the path of a negative solution is numbing, then the path away is sensitivity and not numbing, and tuning
Mhm.
into the pain that you're feeling without trying to get rid of it.
Mhm.
So if you just do that alone, you'll notice that edge of how each day you may be trying to back away from that which you feel. And if you intentionally, consciously don't do that, you'll be on the path right there in that moment.
Mhm.
And then the intelligence will lead you to the next place.
Mm. Now, I didn't ask you ahead of time, but you're, based in New Hampshire, and so is there, um, if someone wanted to reach out to you, uh, is there any way that you would, suggest them doing so?
Well, yeah, I have a location in Exeter where I can see people, 127 Water Street in Exeter.
Mhm.
Also, they can contact me through 603
Mhm.
which is my phone number. Actually, I have another business number, but I haven't memorized that yet. Um, but that's the
What's
way
the
they can
number
connect
again?
with me. It's
The the number
it's
you just gave?
actually, yeah,
603?
603 781 7268.
Very good. Yeah, and if anyone wants to reach out to me as well, they could leave a number or a message for me on Google Voice, which is 332 333 5155. Um, so, um, yeah, I've um, really enjoyed uh, having you on, as I've have long enjoyed our dialogues, um, and very much like to have you back again at some point. And there's a lot more that uh, you know we always have a million things to talk about.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Ben. I appreciate it. It's great talking to you.
You too. Again, I'm very grateful to have you on today. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Bye
Bye.
for now.